Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Happy Sunday Fun Day. We are here to celebrate a very wonderful person and an incredible artist who I am very privileged to call my friend. I think you guys know her. Her name's Vanessa. She's sitting next to me. If you need a refresher, yes, snaps. Poetry snaps for the artist. Vanessa is a visual artist from right here in Los Angeles who weaves together the realms of painting, sculpture, and photography in her creative pursuits. Her artistic journey unfolds as an exploration of human existence, delving into themes such as love, self-discovery, ancestral lineage, and my favorite, spirituality. So today's discussion is going to focus on her current exhibition, Love Always, which some of you got to appreciate behind you. This is a documentation of an internal search for self. The artwork in this collection explores the process of finding oneself through heartbreak, healing, and the exploration of self-identity. So let's just dive in, because I know you and I can talk forever.
Literally, hours. Yes.
Your exhibition explores the healing stages of love. Can you describe the specific stages of love that you chose to depict and how they manifest visually in your work?
So I think I really focused on getting through grief, and then there were stages where, towards the end of grief, being open again. So it ends up being a cycle, which I think that we all just go through over and over, and it's inevitable to go through pain. So I really just wanted to focus on how to find the tools so that when I do go through pain and when I do have to deal with heartbreak and grief, then I know how to do that. I have those tools. And so each painting for me is like a song. And they all have a message. And so it was a documentation of that process that I was going through that I was thinking about it today. I don't know when it started, because I can say maybe 10 years ago when I went through a really hard one and I was finding myself in that one. And so I had to really think about like which thoughts, which beliefs were mine and which beliefs were us as a unit. And so who am I? And how do I get through this by myself? And so each one has a different theme, which we can talk about. But I guess maybe I can pick one, and I would say maybe the first one technically was Dedication to Love, which is the one with the roses coming out of her chest. And the first version of that I made in 2017, but I remade it recently, again, because that first version did not fit the color scheme. So I ended up, that's the only painting I've ever remade, and I love this version so much more. But it was about just thinking about how love is not a person, and so sometimes we attach that to people, and then we say we don't believe in love anymore, but really it's just that person we don't believe in, that version of us. And just thinking about how I've loved so many different people, even family or friends, and how they've been seasons. And so all of it together is love. So it's not about giving up on love, it's just where's the next person or next thing that I'm going to love. So that is one of them.
That's beautiful. I mean, you brought up some really relevant questions that come up on that journey of healing and forgiveness and heartbreak and grief, as you mentioned. That's hard to navigate in your mind alone. So I guess for me, I'm super interested in learning how you take such a complex emotion and feeling that can be hard to understand by yourself and then visualize it. So is there something that happens in your process when you're in it and you're feeling it that contributes to how you then see it visually to create what you then show us?
So the process starts way before I can even think of what the painting looks like, because it's really just me living life. And so trying to heal myself or like feel better. And a lot of times for this show specifically, it was meditation. And so me just kind of going through my process, thinking about whatever it is that I was going through. And then in that meditation, sometimes I would see stories. I would literally watch a whole movie, almost like a dream, but I was awake. So I would be very deep in my meditation. I would see it. I would be like, oh, okay, I get it. And then sometimes it would be a still image of what that was. And sometimes it was just a still. And then I was like, oh, that's the story. So even with this coming together, it was kind of, I guess, backwards, where I went through the process and then I realized, oh, this is what this is. Like, this is what the show is about as a whole versus, oh, I'm going to make a show about this and then creating.
Right.
So I'm just going through life and then it's coming to me and then I'm like, that needs to be painted. And sometimes there's some things that stay in the sketchbook forever and they just never get painted.
Yeah. I'm a witness to that because we've gone to sound baths together, and I remember there have been a few times where like we're deep in it and then we come out of it and you're like, I need a pen and paper, and then you just immediately start sketching whatever it is that you saw. So it's really beautiful to see it all come to life here. Just for me, because I love details, you mentioned that you kind of exhibit the cycle of love. Was that also a thought in how you put up the paintings? Like, is it a certain sort of sequence that it's experienced, or is that not, am I just overthinking it?
Yes and no. I didn't actually think about it consciously, but then when I saw it, when I looked at it, it kind of, and more so I would say technique-wise, because those on that wall are the older ones, and then these on the right wall are a little bit more developed and newer. But as far as, I don't think so. Not in the way that you're asking, where it's like stage, because I think they're all the same. Mm-hmm. And so it's just different themes, but none of them come before the other.
Right. No, I see that. I see a lot of, like the energy on this wall is giving me sort of like the war that you go through in love, because you have the warrior woman, you have the death of the ego, you have resilience. This is going to call on different energy of yours. Meanwhile, on this wall, it's really giving your surrender to love in some type of way.
Well, I didn't even
listen. You know, I make everything deep, and then we got protection in the back, just overlooking everything. So in a way, I feel like unconsciously there was something that you were doing without realizing it, which kind of ties into the whole process of this show in some type of way. Okay, Vanessa, we see you. Were there any moments in creating this collection where you felt your own relationship with love shift or heal? And if so, how did this personal journey influence the final pieces?
Great question.
Yes, and then it was a cycle. So I've been through this cycle many times, not just in romantic love, but even in just in general love, with family, with friends, all of that. But I ended up in the same place I started. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the thing, it's like a continuous thing that you can't really avoid. People are going to hurt you. And that's just a fact of life. And you try your best to have some discernment, but it's always going to happen. Eventually it's going to happen. So I would say it's a process that I've just gone through over and over again, that I've just accepted. And I just have a different perspective on it so that it doesn't hurt as bad anymore, because I have a little bit more understanding of what is happening, and that also I've been through it, I'm going to get through it. You know, at the end of the day, I'll end up with the heart in my hand, you know, and I'll be open again to friends, to love, romantic love, to letting other people in at some point, and then I'll be back at protecting myself. Too much.
Well, you're always protected, but that vulnerability for sure, which I think is also illustrated in you. I mean, I know it's part of your signature with your art is like illustrating the feminine form and nudity, but there's also a testament to that sort of putting your wall down and allowing yourself to be seen like naked, quite literally, but also figuratively. And so that's also really interesting to me as just like a viewer and appreciator of your art. If you thought back to your first painting, which, let's go back to, you said 2017. If that version of Vanessa had to finish this sentence, love is blank, what do you think she would say?
Back then?
Yeah. Channel her.
I think it's always been the same. I think love is care and consideration and respect.
So you today would say the same thing. I feel like you today would include yourself in that.
Sure, yes.
Yeah. So when it comes to self-identity, what has love revealed to you about yourself, and how was that transmuted through your work?
Ooh, I love that question. Okay, so through the process of, when you are hurt and you're grieving something, I think we all have to eventually, we end up asking ourselves, like, just discovering more about ourselves. Who am I? And so in that time, I remember I was creating, I think, the butterfly piece in the back, which is freedom. And I also, around that time, caught COVID. So I very much felt like I was in a cocoon. And I was isolated. I lived by myself. Like, I talked to no one. And I started to ask myself questions about, like, who am I really? And I started to go into questions about race and, like, okay, I remember in school they had the check boxes, and what are the races, like black, white,
Hispanic, and then not Hispanic.
Hispanic is under, what is it? It's not under race, and that's the part that tripped me up. And so I was like, wait, I never knew what to pick for race, because I don't know. I don't know if I'm Hispanic. So I started to do some research on, like, lineage and, like, just in general colonialism and all of that stuff. And then I realized, which is now seems like duh, but I don't think a lot of Hispanic people, Latino people know this. Like, you're a mixture of races, and that's more of a culture. There's a better word for Hispanic, and yeah, but you identify with a culture as a Hispanic person. So then I started to ask myself, like, okay, well, what were the things that people before, like, colonialism came in to play? How were they healing? Because they had their own belief systems. Christianity came in with colonialism. So what were the things that they were doing? And then I started to really dive deep into tribes and, like, Mayan ancestry and, like, Aztecs and all of that stuff, which around the same time I also started to travel, and I got the opportunity to stay with some tribes in Costa Rica and in Ecuador, and I got to go to DR and, like, learn a little bit about the Caribbean, and recently went to Cuba. So I've been really interested in that, and that really just came from me having a curiosity about myself, because I was going through that, like, self-discovery, because I was going through that grief. Yeah.
And I know we're going to touch on that a little more when we talk about the Halo collection that you're featuring, but I'm curious to know how that played a role into the symbolism in the paintings as well.
Oh, yes. So in some of the paintings you have, like, different instruments and stuff. So, like, the shells are used in the Mayan ancestry. It's like they use them for ceremonies. And I noticed when we were doing sound baths, because you were there, that those shells, every time they were played, they really resonated with me and they felt familiar to me. The sound, and then that's when I would really go and see the stories in my head. And so those were really important for me in creating the work. And so I wanted to include them also in the work. And then also we'll get into the tribal symbols too that are in the halos. Let's see, I think that's the main one.
Yeah. It almost sounds like the sound healing was like a portal into some part of either your unconscious or something that, like, unveiled these images for you. You said, in the process of creating this collection, I realized that love continues on even after we die. It continues in the way we loved, in the stories of how we found love or how we lacked it. Our stories continue to be lessons, not just for us, but for the world around us. And through love, the search for self continues for the rest of our lives. What story do you hope this collection tells in regards to your love?
I would say it's just that it's, the cycle thing. It's like inevitable, and then you're still hopeful at the end, like just still being open. And I think that's what love always for me was. It's like not letting the world turn you cold, no matter what happens. And I knew you were going to ask that. I knew you were going to bring up that quote, and so I thought about it. And I got very emotional. Because the reason I wrote that is because my dad passed away lots of years ago. So almost half of my life without him. But also he died by suicide. So he left a letter. And around the time I was making this work, I read the letter back. I hadn't read it since the day he passed away. And so what I realized is I found a story within that letter, and it was like a love story, and it was a story about him making a lot of decisions because he had this desire for love. That's what I saw in the story and like what he wrote. Like there was this deep desire that he had, and at the same time he was self-sabotaging with the people that did love him. And so that's why I wrote that. That's why I wrote like our stories live on, and I don't want to self-sabotage, like in that way. So, yeah.
So what I love about what you just said is you then read my mind, because obviously I'm a writer, so I pay attention to like punctuation. So I appreciate love, comma, always, because that's telling you it's like love always. But then for me, when I hear love always, I think of a love letter because that's how I sign it. And so that made me think of, well, what is the love letter that you are writing through your work?
She's good. That's some good questions.
That's a journalism degree for you.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, you took a second. Take a breath.
I think it's the same as what I just said. It's just really just not letting the world turn you cold.
Yeah.
It's like always moving through the world with love for everybody, and when I said with care, consideration, and respect, and even with the people that hurt you. So that's my thing. It's like I want to move. I never want to turn cold, and that's what I think the work is saying.
Would I be correct in assuming that it's a love letter to yourself then? Perhaps a younger version of yourself?
Sure.
Am I overthinking
Yeah.
it? It's,
and everyone else.
Right, everyone's going to enjoy it.
But definitely to myself, because this was a process that I went through. And yeah, it's something for me to remember, because all of these are like affirmations. People write affirmations on paper and stuff, and I put them on canvas as paintings, as a reminder. Like, okay, remember that? Yes. Got it. Yeah, story.
Absolutely.
I love stories.
I love stories too, and I love that, again, the feminine form and the nudity to me is really significant, because that is sort of like a block of the feminine energy to not allow yourself to be open and vulnerable. And so again, in a way, you're illustrating the same sentiment, but in so many different ways, very cohesively. So let's go back to these halos, which are on the back left wall. You briefly touched on them and how you were inspired by the tribes that you were able to spend time with during your travels. Before we get into that specifically, can you just briefly explain for those who don't know how your signature of using this halo design as a head came to be and why?
Yes. So when I was in college, I went to Italy. I studied abroad in Italy for 3 months. And I saw all of these paintings, all of these Renaissance paintings, and a lot of people, not everyone, had halos. And I started to think about that just thinking, like, what did these people do to deserve a halo? And then don't these other people have halos? And of course, I was in Italy, so all of the paintings were white people. And then I'm questioning, like, okay, what about how does race play into this and all of that stuff? So when I came back, again, a meditation or something, I remember just seeing it. It wasn't something that I consciously was like, I'm going to put a halo on a head of a woman. It just was something I felt like I needed to paint, and so I did. And as I developed as an artist, they started developing too. And as I started to discover myself, now I feel like I have a pretty solid understanding of what they mean for me. Back then I was thinking, okay, they are like, the trinities of life are a wholeness, so the triangle, and then the halo is like, we all are innately born with this goodness in us and all of that. But now they're so much more special to me because now I see that I was also thinking about my own belief system. And so I grew up in a Christian home, and I inherited that, right? I inherited Christianity from my family, and that's how I got to know God. And so I won't ever knock that, because it was definitely my portal to a higher existence and all of that. And then also, while I was discovering myself as like far as like lineage and questioning race and all of that, I was like, okay, but I'm also this, and this is what I come from before colonialism, because colonialism, the history is just so dark. And so it still is crazy to me that people came in and like changed the whole belief system. But then I also wanted to honor that, of whatever people were practicing before, and really learn about it and understand it. So I started to put tribal symbols in the halos, just to kind of bridge that gap for myself, as like, yes, I respect Christianity, and I still, I call it God. People might call that energy a different thing, and I respect that too. But I also respect the belief system of the people that were there and my ancestors that were there before colonialism and before this new belief system came into play.
One of the things I love doing is looking at your halos up close, because I know that you are very particular about the symbols that you include in them. So when it comes to the collection in the back with the different tribes, how did you choose the specific symbols for each tribe? Like, what did you pull that from?
Just from the things that I saw while I was there, because I still don't really know exactly what each little symbol means, because you can't really research that, so whenever I travel, I just make sure that I pay attention to the symbols that I see in those places. So each one is named after either a place or a tribe that I have spent time with.
Beautiful. What have you learned about the tribe's perspective on spirituality, community, or the natural world that influence the way you construct these halos?
I don't know if they inform the way I construct them necessarily, because it's really just me paying attention to like the clothing, the symbols that they are using for like tapestries and things like that. But I do see that they obviously nature is so sacred to them. Corn is really sacred to a lot of different indigenous tribes. It's like that's one of their deities is made of corn. And like the story of like how we came to be is some of them, I think for the Mayans, is like a corn person. And so it's very sacred to them. And what I learned though with the spirituality part is that they might still have a lot of the customs as far as like the way that they live their life, but even for those people, a lot of the spirituality is gone. So it's very hard to find tribes that are still tapped into the belief system that they had before. So like in Ecuador, I spent time with the Quechua tribe, and there was one day I woke up in the middle of the night and we were staying in an abandoned school. And so they use the school as, I didn't know this, but they use the school as kind of like their church too. So one of the other buildings, the light was on, it was like 4 a.m., I was going to the bathroom. And I saw them praying, and I was wondering, because that's what I was really interested in learning about, I was wondering what they were doing or who they were praying to. And so I asked one of the ladies, and she was telling me that they're actually Catholic. So a lot of their tradition, as far as what they wear, they're still holding on to that. But the spiritual part, she said, they don't have a lot of curanderas, which is like the healer woman, not too many shamans, and so that is kind of disappearing even with them. So I'm like really interested in gaining that information, because it feels like it's just withering away.
There's a reason they say that when an artist falls in love with you, you never die, because it inspires an artist's work that lives long beyond you. What is something you hope that we as the audience take away from your time with these tribes and the art that you were able to create from those experiences?
I think my biggest thing as an artist is just I like to be curious, so I like to just spark thought, and so I hope that people will just explore themselves and explore their histories and explore who they are as a person. That's my thing, is always just exploration. I just always want to know more, and once I'm tapped in, then it's like I'm going deep. Yeah.
Yeah, we know. Yeah. I know that this is, your exhibition now, and not to put any pressure, but any ideas or thoughts on what's coming up in the future?
Yes, very excited. It's pretty much what I was just talking about, which is cultural exploration and just the complexity of culture, because with just traveling in general, I've been able to see how complex culture really is. You stay in one place and it just seems like everything is monogamous, even when it comes to exploring other cities. The other cities have a different culture. And so that is my next show, is just like the complexity of culture and how individually we are so complex in culture. So we might share very closely with people, but in general, like, we are very complex individuals, and even our histories, our ancestral lineage that's close, like our grandmothers and all that stuff, but even beyond that, like way before that, it's so complex, and I'm going to be exploring that more in the next show.
I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so now we're going to open up for Q&A if anyone has a burning question. Oh, right in the front.
So you spoke a lot about, romantic love, particularly your relationship with your dad. I'm curious, if you were to reimagine any of the artwork to include a male figure, which one would you choose and why?
Ooh, great question.
Love that. I would say maybe Protected, which is the the hawk wing. I think it would be that one, just because it's like just the idea of protection. We think of male figures. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I was looking at that Protector one, and it seemed like every time you used the gold leaf, like it was in a very specific way, as if you were kind of like hiding, like maybe some images or something. That if I stood a certain way, I could see like a kind of a shadow, and then if I stood another way, it just looked like a triangle. Was that like on purpose?
No, but I love that. I love that it does that. I'm actually very loose when it comes to that part of it, and I don't want it to be a solid triangle. I want it to, like, for pieces to fall off, so my technique is just very, honestly, messy on purpose.
Anything else before we wrap up and let you guys just go enjoy the art?